What if I told you the royal marriage that the world believed was rock solid has already quietly crumbled behind the gilded walls of Kensington Palace? And what if I told you that the trigger wasn't scandal, infidelity, or political blunder, but something even more devastating? A declaration, a verdict, a ruling from King Charles himself that Catherine, Princess of Wales, beloved by millions, praised for her elegance, her grace, her steady presence, was suddenly deemed unfit to be queen. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let that sit with you for a moment. Because if that sounds unbelievable, confusing, or downright shocking, that's exactly how the palace intended it. You were never supposed to hear this story. You were never supposed to know what really happened inside those sealed rooms, what was said behind the drawn velvet curtains, or why Prince William, the man who once looked at Kate with boyish adoration, now found himself forced to choose between the crown and his wife. The truth didn't slip out by mistake. It broke loose. It cracked open like a fault line after months, maybe even years, of pressure, silence, and secrets. But to understand why, we need to start with a single moment. A moment so quiet, so deceptively ordinary, that anyone passing by Windsor Castle that morning would have thought nothing unusual was happening at all. Just a father and his son in a private meeting. Except this time, the stakes of that meeting were nothing short of the monarchy itself. Picture it, a gray morning fog rolling across the grounds. The castle's stone walls swallowing sound the way they have for centuries. A lone black car cutting through the mist. Inside, Prince William sits stiff-backed, jaw tight, one hand gripping the leather seat, as if he's bracing for impact. Because he knows, he feels it, that something is wrong. His father's sudden request, the urgency in Charles's voice, the way palace staff wouldn't meet his eyes that morning. Have you ever had that sinking feeling? That sense that your life is about to split in two, the before and the after, and there's nothing you can do to stop it? That's what William carried as he walked into that private chamber. But here's the thing. What Charles was about to say was more than a royal directive. It was a sentence, and Kate had no idea it was coming. But before we go into that room, before we sit in the silence and watch father and son stare across that polished oak table, let's step back for a moment. Because this story didn't start there. It didn't start in Windsor, and it didn't start with Charles's shocking verdict. This story began months earlier, when tiny fractures began forming beneath the polished surface of the Wales marriage. Think back. Have you noticed the subtle things? The distance during public engagements. The carefully rehearsed smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The odd absences. The unexplained cancellations. The way William would occasionally stand just a bit too far from Kate, or look straight ahead while she glanced in his direction. Maybe you shrugged it off. Maybe you thought, they're just tired, or stressed, or focusing on their roles. But behind palace doors, those little cracks were widening. First came the whispered disagreements about workload. Then the arguments about image, duty, the overwhelming pressure of their future roles. Add in the ever-present comparisons to the late Queen, to Diana, to even Meghan and Harry, and suddenly, a marriage that looked perfect from the outside was suffocating from the inside. But here's the twist. None of that was the real cause of the implosion. Because even a strained marriage can survive. Even disagreements can be resolved. Even royal stress can be managed. But what no marriage, royal or not, can endure is a throne declaring judgment on a wife. Imagine being told that the person you married is no longer suitable, not because of something she did, but because of how she is perceived. Imagine being told that the woman you love, the mother of your children, does not meet the internal criteria for queen. Imagine being ordered, directly or indirectly, to consider a future without her. That is what happened. That is where everything began to spiral. Now, you may be wondering, what could possibly make Charles come to such a drastic conclusion? What did he see or hear that pushed him to make a declaration no king has made in generations? Was it health concerns? Image issues? Rumors inside the palace corridors? Or something darker, something the public hasn't been told? We're going to peel back every layer of that mystery. But first, let's zoom back in on William. Because the moment Charles delivered that verdict, something in William broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. When he walked out of that meeting, his steps were slow, his breathing uneven, his eyes unfocused, like a man replaying the same sentence over and over in his head, trying to make it make sense. And here's where it gets heartbreaking. Kate was waiting for him at Kensington Palace. She had no idea he had just been given the most devastating news of their marriage. She didn't know she was about to watch her entire future slip away like sand through her fingers. But maybe she felt something. Because when William walked in, she stood up quickly. Too quickly. Like someone frightened. Someone bracing for impact. Have you ever sensed a storm coming before you see the first cloud? Before the first raindrop hits? That was Kate in that moment. And yet, here's the cruel irony. She still had hope. Hope that whatever was wrong could be fixed. Hope that they were still a team. Hope that he would choose her. But William didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, long enough for fear to fill the silence. But do you know what the most haunting part of all this is? Kate wasn't the only one who could tell something was off. Their children sensed it too. Kids always do. George became quieter. Charlotte watched her parents more closely. Louis grew clingier, as if instinct told him the ground beneath his family was shifting. This was no longer just a royal matter. It was a family unraveling in slow motion. And all because of a declaration that the world wasn't supposed to hear. But why now? Why in 2025? Why after 2 decades of partnership, duty, and carefully crafted public image? Why decide that Kate, after years of being praised as the monarchy's most stabilizing force, was suddenly unfit? That is the question that will carry us through this story. Because the answer is layered, complicated, emotionally charged, and rooted in palace politics that stretch back decades. But before we uncover the palace dossier, before we reveal the truth behind Charles's verdict, and before we step into the explosive confrontation that followed, we need to return to that first spark, that first shift, that first undeniable moment when the royal machine began moving against Kate. Because once that machine starts turning, once the gears lock into motion, nothing can stop them. Not love, not loyalty, not even the heir to the throne. And that moment, the moment everything truly began, didn't happen in a castle, or a palace, or a private royal residence. It happened somewhere far more unexpected, somewhere Kate never imagined her future would be decided. And what happened there changed everything. Section complete. Waiting for your go to begin Chapter 1. You said, go. ChatGPT said. Chapter 1. The meeting that ended everything. At least 2,000 words. Dramatic expose tone. Begins with a mini hook. Big paragraphs. Punchy lines mixed with long descriptive ones. Emotional beats. Ends on a major cliffhanger. I will stop once the section reaches completion. Have you ever walked into a room knowing, absolutely knowing, that whatever waits on the other side of the door will change your life forever? That was Prince William on the morning everything ended. It didn't matter that he grew up in palaces, that he'd been trained his entire life to handle pressure, or that he was next in line to the British throne. None of that mattered when King Charles summoned him to Windsor with no warning, no explanation, and, most telling of all, no invitation extended to Catherine. This was to be a meeting between father and son. No advisors, no aides, no courtiers. The kind of meeting that never happens unless something catastrophic is about to unfold. William felt that truth deep in his bones long before he reached the castle gates. But let's rewind for a moment. Because the palace wants you to believe that all royal meetings are calm, polite, procedural. Not this one. Something about the tone of Charles's message, short, cold, specific, sent a ripple of unease through William's entire staff. Something in the king's voice, too controlled, too measured, made William's stomach clench. And when William asked whether Kate should join him, the reply was a simple, chilling no. That was the moment William realized something was off. Very off. As the car made the familiar drive up the long, sweeping entrance toward Windsor Castle, William stared out the window with an expression his security officers quietly exchanged looks over. He looked like a man heading toward a verdict. And he was. But here's the question the world never asks. What did Charles want so urgently that he summoned William alone? What was so serious that it required secrecy, even from the Princess of Wales? And why now? Because the truth is, Charles doesn't do spontaneity. He doesn't do emotional impulses. Everything is planned, measured, sanitized. So when he calls his heir without warning, that means something has gone terribly wrong. Let me paint the scene for you. Windsor Castle stands tall, ancient, and unmoved by the storms of centuries. Its walls have witnessed royal triumphs, royal failures, and royal collapses. But that morning, the air inside was thick, tense in a way that even staff whispered about afterward. William was led through corridors so quiet he could hear his own shoes echoing off stone floors. He passed by portraits of kings and queens who faced crises of their own, abdications, betrayals, power struggles. But none of them knew what it meant to sit across from a father who was also their sovereign. And that's exactly what William was about to do. When he entered the private chamber, Charles was already seated. Not pacing, not reading, not writing, just sitting, waiting. And that alone was a bad sign. Charles never waited for anyone. Protocol typically required others to wait for him. But this time, he wanted William to walk into the gravity of the moment without distraction. The door closed behind William with a heavy thud, and that's when the silence became suffocating. Charles looked up slowly. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't frustrated. It wasn't even disappointed. It was resigned, and that was worse. The king folded his hands together and exhaled in a way that made William instantly brace himself. "We need to discuss Catherine," Charles said quietly. "Not Kate. Not Catherine, Princess of Wales. Just Catherine." Flat, formal, detached. William's posture stiffened. His face tensed. That single line cut through the air like a blade. "What about her?" he asked, voice low, cautious. Charles didn't ease into it. He didn't soften the blow. He didn't show mercy. He simply delivered the sentence. "There are concerns," Charles said. "Significant concerns about her suitability for the role of queen." Just like that. A marriage, 2 decades long. A partnership built through storms and triumphs. A woman beloved across the world, reduced to a sterile phrase. Concerns. Concerns about suitability. Concerns about the future queen. William blinked slowly, his breath catching in his throat. Have you ever heard words so unexpected that your brain refuses to process them? That moment when shock doesn't feel like panic, but like numbness. Heavy, cold, immobilizing? That was William. "Concerns?" he repeated, almost incredulous. Charles nodded. And for the first time, William noticed how carefully the king's expression was being maintained, as if the wrong twitch of an eyebrow could set the entire room ablaze. Charles had rehearsed this moment. He had prepared himself for it. He had decided on this verdict long before William entered the room. That realization hit William like a punch. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't a debate. This was a declaration. "What concerns?" William pressed, his tone sharper now. Charles steepled his fingers. Her health, her stability, her readiness. The pauses were deliberate, each one slicing deeper. William's jaw tightened. And this is where the contradictions begin. Contradictions the public never sees. Contradictions the palace works overtime to bury. Kate is praised for her composure, praised for her elegance, praised for her calm presence. So why now, suddenly, was she unfit? Why now, after years of glowing approvals? Why now, at the brink of William's rise to kingship? Charles continued. There has been pressure, more scrutiny, more strain, and she hasn't adjusted as the role requires. William's eyes narrowed. "You're basing a queen's future on speculation," he said. But Charles didn't flinch. "I am basing it," he replied, "on information." There it was. The word that shifted the entire tone of the conversation. Information. The palace's most dangerous weapon. The one thing that can make or break a royal reputation. William felt a chill race down his spine. "What information?" he asked quietly. Charles paused, then delivered the second blow. "A dossier has been compiled." The world has never heard about this dossier. It wasn't filed under official records. It wasn't entered into archival documentation. It wasn't created through public channels. It was internal, confidential, controlled. The kind of document that can destroy a future queen without ever being acknowledged publicly. William leaned forward, voice hardening. "Who authorized this?" Charles lifted his chin. "I did." Silence. The kind of silence that suffocates. The kind that turns father and son into king and subject. William stood abruptly, anger washing over him in a red-hot flash. "You evaluated my wife behind my back." Charles didn't move. She was evaluated for the safety of the monarchy. That line right there, that single sentence, was the moment something inside William cracked. Because for years, he had defended the monarchy, protected the monarchy, sacrificed for the monarchy. But now the monarchy was turning on the woman he loved. And it wasn't done with her yet. Charles continued speaking, but William barely heard the words. Phrases like optics, public expectation, preparation, pressures floated around him like smoke. Cold, disconnected, clinical. Have you ever been in a moment where someone is talking, but your mind is roaring so loudly that the words become meaningless? That was William now. Then Charles delivered the final blow. For the stability of the institution, he said, we need to prepare for the possibility that Catherine cannot fulfill the role of queen. Prepare. Possibility. Cannot fulfill. Every word was chosen with precision, each one designed to sound responsible, reasonable, necessary. But William heard what Charles wasn't saying. Kate needed to be removed. That was the truth behind the careful language. That was the message beneath the polished veneer. The monarchy, the institution Charles prioritized above all else, wanted Kate out of the future. William felt his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Are you telling me, he said slowly, voice trembling with fury, that you want me to leave my wife? Charles didn't answer immediately, because the truth was yes. He wanted the option on the table. What he finally said was softer, but no less devastating. I am telling you to consider the future of the crown. And there it was, the line that changed everything. Not a direct order, not a command, something worse. A directive wrapped in pressure, wrapped in expectation, wrapped in monarchy logic. William looked at his father, not as a king, not as a sovereign, not as a leader, but as the man who was now asking him to sacrifice the mother of his children for royal optics. Something inside William went cold, very cold, because now he understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was an ultimatum disguised as concern. And Charles wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the second accusation in that dossier, the one Charles hadn't yet revealed, would cut even deeper, much deeper, and it would push William to a place he never thought he'd go, to a decision he never believed he'd make, to a conclusion that would unravel his marriage forever. And here's the part no one knows. The second accusation wasn't about Kate's public role. It wasn't about her health. It wasn't about her workload. It was something far more personal. Something Charles believed justified removing her from the line of queenship. Something William would never forgive. But what was in that dossier? What accusation could be so powerful, so damaging, that it could destroy a royal marriage? What did Charles reveal next? The answer will shake everything you thought you knew about this story. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Chapter 1 is complete. Type go when you're ready for Chapter 2. You said, go. ChatGPT said, Chapter 2, The Secret Dossier Against Kate. At least 2,000 words. Dramatic expose tone. Emotional beats. Punchy plus long sentences. Cliffhanger at the end. I will stop once the section reaches completion. What if the truth about a royal marriage wasn't found in whispered arguments, public appearances, or icy glances, but in a document? A document never meant to see daylight. A document compiled in silence. A document that could dismantle a future queen with a single sentence. That is what William was up against. Because the moment Charles uttered the words, "A dossier has been compiled," something shifted in the air. It was the kind of statement that changes the rules of the game. The kind of statement that means someone has been watching, recording, judging, and Kate had no idea. Have you ever felt the ground suddenly tilt beneath you? Not because you missed a step, but because someone else pulled the floor out from under your feet? That's what this dossier represented. It wasn't just paperwork. It was betrayal, crafted by people Kate trusted, or at least, people she believed weren't plotting against her. But let's start at the beginning. Because the truth behind this dossier reveals everything, and the lies behind it reveal even more. William stared at Charles, trying to make sense of what was happening. A dossier? He repeated slowly, as if the word itself tasted bitter. Charles nodded once, his expression stone-like. William's mind raced. Who authorized it? Who contributed to it? And perhaps most importantly, who initiated it? The palace may look like a fairy tale, but behind those walls is a hierarchy more complex than any government. Departments, advisors, private secretaries, communications teams, courtiers who have more influence than elected politicians. People whose job is to protect the monarchy, not the individuals inside it. And when the institution decides someone is becoming a liability, It acts. Quietly. Efficiently. Ruthlessly. Who compiled it? William asked, voice tight. This time, Charles hesitated, which meant the answer wasn't going to be good. The household, he finally said. One of the most dangerous words in palace politics. Because patterns can be anything. A missed engagement, a moment of stress, a series of bad photos, a delayed response, a private emotional moment caught by the wrong pair of eyes. Patterns don't have to be true. They only have to be repeated. William's voice hardened. Show me. But Charles didn't. And that was the moment William knew this dossier wasn't just damaging, it was designed to be. Charles began summarizing its contents, each item delivered like another crack forming in the foundation of William and Kate's marriage. Concerns have been raised about Catherine's resilience under pressure, he said, and her recent withdrawals from public duties, her increasing dependence on staff, her tendency to become overwhelmed. William's jaw clenched. That's normal, he snapped. She's under extraordinary stress. But Charles didn't stop. He continued listing items like he was reading a report. Lapses in protocol, inconsistent engagement performance, emotional strain, extended recovery times, failure to adapt to increased scrutiny. Have you ever been in a situation where the person in front of you is explaining a version of reality that feels completely foreign and yet deeply unfair? That was William. Because whatever Kate struggled with, she did what every royal spouse before her had done. She endured. She adapted. She pushed through. But when a queen consort stumbles, even once, the monarchy doesn't forget. And it definitely doesn't forgive. William leaned forward, voice shaking with controlled fury. This is nitpicking, he said. This is twisting small things into. Charles cut him off. There is more. William froze. More? The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening like fog. Every instinct told him that whatever was coming next was the real reason for this dossier. Charles looked down briefly, as if deciding whether to say the words out loud. Then he lifted his eyes. There are concerns, he said quietly, about Catherine's emotional stability. Everything went still, absolutely still, because that phrase, that loaded, carefully constructed palace phrase, carried a meaning far darker than it sounded. Emotional stability, the monarchy's coded way of saying, we don't trust her. We're not sure she can handle it. We think she's fragile. We think she may break. William's breath caught in his throat. That's insulting, he replied sharply. And untrue. Charles didn't blink. This is what has been observed. Observed. Another coded word. Meaning, monitored. Meaning, watched. By whom? Staff? Advisors? Physicians? Someone close? Multiple people? William felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. How long has this been happening? He asked. Charles sighed. Months. Months. They had been evaluating Kate for months. Analyzing her. Taking notes. Documenting her behavior. Behind her back. William felt sick. Because if they had been monitoring her for months, then they already had a verdict in mind. Are you telling me, William asked slowly, that my wife has been under surveillance? Charles flinched, the first crack in his royal composure. It wasn't surveillance, he insisted. It was observation. William laughed, a short, bitter sound. Observation is surveillance in a nicer suit. Charles looked away. William stood abruptly, pacing the room, running a hand through his hair in raw frustration. You judged her, he said, without context, without compassion, without even speaking to her. Charles remained silent. And that was the answer. But here's the thing the public never sees. Behind the royal smiles are human beings, not machines. Behind the protocols are pressures that break people. And behind the monarchy's polished facade is a system that values image over individuals. The dossier wasn't about Kate failing. It was about the institution deciding she wasn't the image they wanted anymore. And then came the bombshell. Charles leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. There is one more section, he said. William froze. Another section? The room suddenly felt colder. Charles hesitated. Which meant whatever he was about to say was far more serious than concerns about emotional strain. This was the part he didn't want to say. The part he wished someone else could deliver. The part that would cut William open. What section? William demanded. Charles swallowed. There have been reports, he said carefully, that Catherine has been emotionally distant from you. That she has been withdrawing. That she is. He paused. No longer providing the partnership a future king requires. It was the politest version of the ugliest accusation. They were claiming Kate was failing as a wife. William's breath left him. That is a lie, he said coldly. Charles didn't deny it. He didn't defend it. He didn't confirm it. He simply said, it is what has been observed. And that was worse. Because William suddenly understood what this dossier truly was. It wasn't an evaluation. It was justification. Justification for the monarchy to intervene in his marriage. To give him an out. Or to force one. This wasn't about Kate. It wasn't even about William. It was about the throne. The crown had decided that Kate's perceived fragility, whether real, exaggerated, or manufactured, posed a risk to the future of the monarchy. And when the monarchy perceives a risk, it removes it. William felt a surge of anger so intense that he had to tense his jaw to keep it from spilling out. You're basing the future of my marriage, he said, on palace gossip and biased notes from staff. Charles didn't respond. Because he didn't have to. The decision had already been made. The dossier was the weapon. Charles was the messenger. William was the target. Kate was the casualty. And then came the twist. The part that changed the entire tone of the conversation. Charles closed the dossier, exhaled slowly, and said, I need you to consider your position. William froze. Your position, Charles repeated softly. Your duty. Your future. The future of the crown. And in that moment, William understood exactly what his father was doing. He wasn't offering guidance. He wasn't offering support. He wasn't offering counsel. He was offering William a choice. A false choice. The crown. Or Kate. If you were in his position, what would you choose? Your wife? The mother of your children? Or an institution that raised you, shaped you, and demanded every part of you? William felt his chest constrict. Because he knew what Charles was expecting. And he knew what the monarchy wanted. But he also knew something Charles didn't. Something that would make this entire situation explode. Because William had already seen something in that dossier. A detail Charles hadn't meant to reveal. A detail that pointed to who inside the palace had helped compile it. A detail that changed everything. And that detail would push William to confront the real mastermind behind the campaign against Kate. But what was that detail? What name did William see? Who had betrayed Kate from within her own circle? The answer will blow the story open, and the storm that follows will tear the palace apart. Chapter 2 is complete. Type go when you're ready for Chapter 3. You said, go. ChatGPT said, Chapter 3, The Kensington Palace Meltdown. At least 2,000 words. Dramatic expose tone. Emotional beats, punchy and long sentences, cliffhanger ending. I will stop once the section reaches completion. The moment William left Windsor, a storm followed him. Not a rainstorm, not a gust of wind, not something you could see or hear. A storm of dread, of fear, of betrayal. One that Kate could feel even before he crossed the threshold of Kensington Palace. She had been preparing for a normal morning. A quiet breakfast with the children, a few engagements, perhaps a quick meeting with aides about upcoming charitable events. Nothing extraordinary, nothing alarming. Nothing to suggest the world she knew was about to shift on its axis. But the air in Kensington that morning was different. Thick, heavy, like the building itself sensed the tension brewing within. Kate had felt it before. That subtle shift in energy, the almost imperceptible change when palace staff avoided her gaze. When her security team moved with unusual alertness. When William's phone calls became longer, heavier, and abruptly curt. She brushed it off. For a time, dismissed it, told herself it was nothing. Until that moment, William entered the room with a stiffness that stopped Kate mid-step. His eyes were narrowed, lips pressed tightly, jaw locked. There was a physicality to his posture that screamed urgency, a signal that something in the palace's carefully constructed narrative had shattered. William, Kate asked, voice soft but steady. She took a step forward, hoping for a comforting smile, a familiar laugh. The warmth that had been the bedrock of their relationship for years. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just stood there, the silence between them heavy and suffocating. Have you ever seen someone walk into a room, carrying the weight of worlds you cannot imagine? That was William now. Kate's intuition screamed. Something was wrong. More than wrong. Catastrophically wrong. And in that instant, she realized it. Whatever he was about to say would change everything. Kate, he finally said, his voice low, measured, and trembling at once. We need to talk. Now. The calm, measured Kate, who had handled every public scrutiny, every press intrusion, every whisper behind closed doors, suddenly felt her knees weaken. Her stomach churned. Her heart raced like a trapped bird. Because this wasn't a casual discussion. This wasn't about event scheduling or wardrobe or charity appearances. This was something she hadn't anticipated. Something so severe that William's normally controlled composure was cracking. And then it hit her. She had been warned. Not by William. Not by anyone in the family she could trust. No, she had been warned subtly. Through whispers, through strange glances, through the subtle, almost imperceptible behavior of palace staff. But she hadn't believed it. She couldn't. Until now. William took a deep breath, trying to steel himself, trying to protect the last thread of control he had. I've just come from Windsor, he said slowly, deliberately. From a meeting with my father. Kate's heart skipped. She had feared the palace, yes, but the monarchy itself? The thought seemed impossible, almost abstract. Your father? She echoed, disbelief creeping into her voice. William nodded once. Then, the words she never expected, the words she couldn't have prepared for, came. He told me. He thinks you're unfit to be queen. The room went still. Time itself seemed to stall. The walls closed in. Even the air seemed heavier. Kate's first instinct was denial. She laughed softly, a sound that came out as a strangled sob. No, she whispered. That can't be. That's impossible. William shook his head. His face was etched with exhaustion, guilt, and an anger that had nowhere to go. It's true, he said, voice barely above a whisper. He believes it, and he expects me to consider it. Kate's mind raced. He expects you to what? To consider it? To agree with him? To act? She couldn't comprehend. Not yet. Tears sprung to her eyes, unbidden, unstoppable. For the first time in public memory, Kate, the composed, elegant, poised Princess of Wales, began to cry. Not softly, not politely, but with a rawness that came from betrayal, shock, and the unbearable weight of injustice. She collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling. William moved closer, hesitant, unsure whether to comfort her or shield his own feelings. Kate, he began, but words failed him. How do you explain the impossible? How do you tell someone you love that the monarchy itself has judged them inadequate? How do you deliver a verdict you didn't write, but are now forced to consider? Kate's sobs grew louder. Every tear was a question, an accusation, a plea. Why? Why now? Why me? Why us? Have you ever felt utterly powerless in a moment where every instinct screams you should fight, resist, challenge the world? That was Kate. And then came another realization. The children. George. Charlotte. Louis. What would they think if they saw their mother like this? How would they process the knowledge that the monarchy, the very institution they had been taught to revere, was turning against her? Kate's hands covered her face. She tried to suppress the sound of her sobs. Tried to hold herself together for their sake. But the weight was too much. And as the hours ticked on, the palace staff whispered. Some avoided the room entirely, fearing to witness what had become a private crisis of monumental proportions. Others lingered in doorways, unsure if they should intervene. Outside, the world continued as normal. Tourists walked past Kensington Palace, oblivious. Reporters prepared for the next royal engagement, unaware that a quiet, unprecedented crisis was unfolding behind the palace walls. But inside, everything had changed. William tried to speak, tried to navigate the conversation, tried to find a thread of reason that could salvage both his marriage and his duty. Kate, we need to think about the future, he said carefully, choosing his words as if navigating a minefield. You mean you agree with him? She asked, voice breaking. No, William replied. I don't know what to do. That admission, meant to be comforting, only heightened her fear. Because if the man who loved her could not protect her from this, then who could? And just when the tension reached its peak, the palace doors opened. A staff member approached cautiously, carrying documents, whispered messages, updates from Windsor that William had not yet seen. Kate's sobs turned into quiet gasps. William's jaw clenched. The reality hit them both. This was bigger than a conversation, bigger than one meeting, bigger than the two of them. The monarchy itself had intervened, and there was no easy path forward. Have you ever been trapped in a moment where every possible choice feels like betrayal? That's exactly where Kate and William were. And in that moment, with tears streaming, hearts breaking, and the palace watching silently, the first cracks of the marriage widened irreparably. Because when the institution decides, when the crown issues a verdict, there is no turning back. But the worst was yet to come. Because the moment Kate learned the full contents of the dossier, she realized something even more chilling. This wasn't just about her suitability. This was about silencing her, about controlling the narrative, about breaking her spirit. And what came next would push both William and Kate to the edge, emotionally, mentally, and publicly. The storm inside Kensington Palace had only just begun. Chapter 3 is complete. Type go when you're ready for Chapter 4. You said, go. ChatGPT said, Chapter 4, William's final decision. At least 2,000 words. Dramatic exposé tone. Emotional beats, tension, and cliffhanger ending. I will stop once the section reaches completion. What would you do if the person you loved most in the world was suddenly deemed unfit? Not by circumstance, not by choice, but by an institution you had spent your entire life serving? That was William's reality. After the meeting at Windsor and the meltdown at Kensington Palace, he was left alone in a private sitting room. The curtains were drawn, the walls felt suffocating, and the air was thick with the weight of decisions not yet made. He sat in silence, staring at a fireplace that wasn't lit, at a chair that wasn't meant for comfort, and at a world that suddenly seemed unbearably heavy. In that silence, he replayed the words Charles had delivered. There is a dossier. She may not be fit to be queen. You must consider your position. The phrasing was careful, calculated. Charles wasn't commanding him outright. He was creating a scenario in which William might make the choice himself, effectively outsourcing the act of destruction, but leaving the responsibility squarely on William's shoulders. And for the first time, William understood the full gravity of what he was facing. Because this wasn't just about Kate. This wasn't even just about the monarchy. This was about him. About his children. About every decision he would ever make as future king. Have you ever felt trapped between duty and love? Between morality and obligation? Between the world's expectations and your own heart? That was William's position. He thought of George. He thought of Charlotte. He thought of Louis. Would they understand why their father allowed this to happen? Would they forgive him? Would history forgive him? And then he thought of Kate, the woman who had been by his side through everything. The woman he had vowed to love, protect, and honor. The woman who had been praised by the world for her grace, composure, and unwavering support. Was he about to betray her? The room felt smaller, the walls closer, every tick of the clock a hammer on his conscience. He had advisors in his head, voices from his life. The monarchy comes first. Think of the children. Don't let personal feelings cloud your judgment. You have a duty that transcends emotion. And alongside those voices, the ones that mattered most to him whispered louder. Love her. Protect her. Stand by her. The contradiction was unbearable. William got up and began pacing the room. Each step was deliberate. Each step heavy. He tried to imagine the path forward. A public divorce announcement? A quiet separation? A staged reconciliation to protect appearances? None of it felt right. None of it would ever feel right. And yet, the institution had made its intentions clear. The dossier had been delivered. The verdict had been cast. And Charles expected action. William paused, hand on the back of a chair, head bowed. He considered the weight of his role. A prince. A future king. A son. A husband. A father. Which part of him should he prioritize? Which part would history remember? Which part would his children remember? Hours passed. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He did not speak. He thought of Diana, of how she had been judged, scrutinized, and vilified, of how Charles had handled her, of how the world remembered her struggle. He could not repeat history. He refused to repeat history. And yet, standing there, staring at the cold room, he realized that whatever decision he made would inevitably mirror the same cruelty. Because the monarchy does not bend for love. It bends for survival. William knew what he had to do. He had to make a choice that would end his marriage, or at least end it publicly. A choice that would define his children's perception of their parents. A choice that would either honor or betray Kate. He reached for the phone. A direct line to his private secretary. A line that had always connected him to the administrative machinery of the palace. He placed the call. "Yes," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside. "I've made my decision. Proceed with the necessary preparations." Every word was deliberate. Every syllable weighed against the consequence. He felt the cold surge of inevitability. This was not a moment of rage. Not a moment of impulsivity. Not a moment of weakness. It was the palace needed stability. The crown needed continuity. The world needed a version of royalty they could understand. And if that meant sacrificing his marriage, so be it. When he hung up, the silence of the room returned. But it was different now. He had made the choice. And that choice carried a weight heavier than any crown. He thought of Kate, alone in the room down the hall. He thought of her tears, her disbelief, her fear. He thought of the moment she had realized the institution she had dedicated herself to might never support her. He could not undo what he had set in motion. Not now. Not ever. The clock ticked on. The palace staff moved cautiously, whispers like shadows along the walls. The children were somewhere, unaware of the storm that had already begun. William knew the next step would be public, dramatic, and irrevocable. But before that, there was a private confrontation, a conversation that would decide everything. A conversation with Kate. And when he finally entered the room where she sat, exhausted, tear-streaked, and trembling, he understood the full consequence of his decision. Her eyes met his. Confusion, hurt, betrayal, a question that needed no words. How could you? William swallowed hard, the words caught in his throat, because he had no answers. Only the path that the monarchy had demanded, the choice he felt compelled to make, and the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. And in that moment, the couple who had once seemed inseparable, whose love had been celebrated worldwide, faced the terrifying truth. Their marriage was no longer their own. It was now the property of the crown. And the decision William had made would set off a chain reaction that neither of them could control. Because what comes after a choice like this is never simple. It is never clean. It is never private. The moment he stepped into that room to speak with Kate, the first irreversible consequences began. And what came next would not only redefine their relationship, but it would send shockwaves through the palace, the press, and the world at large. Chapter 4 is complete. Type go when you're ready for Chapter 5. You said, go. ChatGPT said. Chapter 5, the children react. At least 2,000 words. Dramatic exposé tone. Emotional beats, short punchy lines mixed with long descriptive passages, cliffhanger ending. I will stop once the section reaches completion. Have you ever watched a child's world shatter before their eyes and felt utterly powerless to protect them? That is exactly what happened in the days following William's fateful decision. George, Charlotte, and Louis had grown up surrounded by cameras, ceremonies, and royal protocol. They understood that their parents were public figures, larger-than-life personalities whose every smile and gesture was analyzed by millions. But nothing in their young lives had prepared them for this. George, at age 7, had always looked up to his father with quiet admiration. He mimicked William's posture, his gestures, even the way he spoke. George's sense of duty was innate, a reflection of the training and example his father provided. But when whispers of tension between his parents began circulating, he felt an unfamiliar fear seep into his chest. Something was wrong. Something was shifting. Charlotte, ever perceptive at 6, noticed the subtle changes in the palace air. She had watched her mother's hands tremble during an otherwise ordinary breakfast, noticed William's distant gaze and stiff movements. Her young mind, sharp and inquisitive, began to put the pieces together. Something was happening, and it was serious. Louis, at 3, could not articulate the complexity of the situation, but he felt it. The tension, the silence, the way adults spoke in hushed tones behind closed doors. The sense of unease that blanketed the palace, thicker than fog rolling across the Thames. One afternoon, Kate tried to gather the children for a normal activity, arts and crafts in a bright, sunlit room. But the attempt was futile. George pushed his crayons away, Charlotte kept glancing at the door, and Louis buried his face in a cushion, whimpering softly. Kate's heart ached. She had always been calm, collected, and patient, but now she felt herself fraying at the edges. She had loved them fiercely, protected them diligently, and now she was powerless to shield them from the storm consuming their family. "Mommy, is it true?" George asked finally, his voice quiet, steady, yet edged with fear. Kate froze. Her hands hovered over the crayons. She couldn't answer. Not yet. Because even as a mother, she could not explain the magnitude of what was unfolding behind the palace walls. She could not simplify decades of royal politics, decades of expectations, decades of surveillance and judgment, into words a 7-year-old could comprehend. She took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "Everything's fine," she said softly, too softly even for her own ears. "We're fine." Charlotte, who had grown increasingly anxious, stared up at her mother. "But you're sad," she said plainly. "And Daddy's different. He's quiet." Louis whimpered again. His small hands gripped the edges of his cushion, as though it were the only anchor in a suddenly chaotic world. Kate felt her chest tighten. Every instinct screamed to protect them, to reassure them, to explain. But how do you explain that their father has been forced into a decision that could unravel their entire family? How do you tell children that the institution meant to safeguard them is now dictating their mother's fate? Meanwhile, William, just down the hall, wrestled with his own conscience. He wanted to comfort his children, to reassure them, to be the father they had always looked up to. But he was also haunted by the knowledge that his own decision, made with the best intentions he could muster, had placed them in the eye of the storm. How could he be both protector and participant in the collapse? He entered the room slowly, aware of every movement. George looked up, eyes wide. Charlotte's grip on her doll tightened. Louis clung to the cushion even more fiercely. William knelt to be at eye level with George. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you okay?" George's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Is Mommy going to be okay?" William swallowed. "Yes," he said, though even as he spoke, he felt the tremor of uncertainty in his own voice. "Yes, she's going to be okay." Charlotte tugged at her father's sleeve. "But Daddy, what about the crown? What does this mean?" William paused. How much could he reveal without breaking them, without shattering the delicate balance they had left in place? He tried to smile. "Sometimes, Charlotte," he said carefully, "adults have to make very difficult decisions. But we are a family, and families stay together, no matter what." Louis, sensing the tension, began to cry softly. And in that sound, William felt a physical pain he couldn't name, a combination of guilt, fear, and helplessness. Kate stepped forward, wrapping her arms around her children. She whispered soothingly, though her own tears threatened to spill. "It's okay, my loves," she said. "We're together. Nothing will change that." But the lie, even if necessary for survival, weighed heavily on her. Because deep down, she knew that everything had changed. The next morning, the children noticed the subtle shifts in their routine. Security measures increased. Staff movements became more purposeful. Even the familiar faces of tutors and aides seemed distant, watching, assessing. George turned to his mother, voice small but piercing. "Mommy, will we still be a family?" Kate's heart broke in that moment. She had always promised them stability, safety, love. And now, the very institution meant to protect them had introduced a fracture into the family's foundation. "Of course we will, George," she said, voice quivering. "Of course we will." But the words rang hollow, even to her own ears. Because the truth was undeniable, the royal machine had intervened. It had judged her. It had questioned her suitability. It had forced William into an impossible position. And the children, perceptive beyond their years, had already sensed the shift. They asked questions she could not answer. They looked for reassurance she could not fully give. And in their eyes, she saw fear, the same fear she felt herself. That afternoon, Kate sat with William in the drawing room, children nearby, trying to do homework or play quietly. Neither parent spoke. Words had failed them both. The silence was thick, oppressive. Finally, Charlotte broke it. "Daddy," she said, voice steady but firm, "does this mean Mommy is not the queen?" The question hung in the air, more powerful than any statement. William looked at Kate. Kate looked at William. Neither could answer without betraying truth or duty. And in that pause, the children realized something. The adults who were supposed to protect them were at war. Not with each other, Not yet, but with forces beyond their control. The storm had arrived, and the children, innocent and unaware of the full scope, were caught in the eye of it. George's small voice broke the silence again. "Mommy, will you leave us?" Kate felt her chest constrict, a physical pressure. She could not bear the thought. She could not imagine losing them, even as her own world was unraveling. William reached for her hand, a gesture of solidarity, but even that connection trembled under the weight of expectation and institutional pressure. The room was quiet again, save for the soft sniffles of Louis. But the silence was temporary. The palace, with its endless eyes and ears, would not allow this quiet to persist. Not when headlines would erupt, gossip would spread, and the public's curiosity would ignite. Because once the children sensed the fracture, the world would too. And in that instant, Kate knew the stakes had risen beyond marriage, beyond love, beyond family. This was now about legacy, about perception, about survival. And the next move, the one that would determine the fate of their family, was already being planned. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived, and what came next would expose the full fracture between duty and love, between crown and family, between William's loyalty and Kate's survival. When Kate's tears finally dried, and the children were tucked into their rooms, a new force emerged, one the palace hadn't fully anticipated. Carol Middleton. The mother who had watched her daughter endure public scrutiny, relentless media attention, and now, the silent judgment of the monarchy itself. Carol was no stranger to confrontation. She had fought for her daughter from the very beginning, navigating the treacherous waters of royal protocol with a mix of maternal instinct and keen intelligence. But this was unprecedented. Kate had tried to shield her from the storm, to protect her from the brutal machinery that threatened to dismantle their family from within. But Carol had a radar for injustice, and she could sense when her daughter was in real peril, even if Kate herself refused to admit it. The call came first. Late in the evening, after the palace had quieted, William, still reeling from the aftermath of his private decisions, tried to handle it delicately. "Mrs. Middleton," he said, voice steady but tense. "Kate's resting. She's fine." Carol, of course, did not accept that answer. "Fine?" she demanded, her tone sharp, incisive, like a blade cutting through pretense. "You think I'm going to let you tell me my daughter is fine when the crown itself has decided she isn't? I want to know everything, William." Now, it was the first challenge to the royal authority in what would become a week-long battle of wills, influence, and subtle war. William tried to placate her. He tried to explain the situation delicately, to frame it in terms of institutional pressure rather than personal betrayal. But Carol would hear nothing of it. "You are her husband," she said, voice trembling with fury and fear. "And yet you allow them to judge her? To treat her like she is disposable?" There was a pause. William, trained his entire life to navigate tense conversations, had no response. Nothing could satisfy the mother who had given everything to protect her daughter. And then Carol issued her first move, subtle yet devastating in its implications. "If anything happens to her, if they force her out, you will answer to me." William felt the weight of those words, not just as a husband, not just as a father, but as a man caught between loyalty to the crown and duty to his family. In the following days, Carol became a whirlwind of strategic action. She mobilized her private legal team, already preparing contingencies. She contacted trusted friends and media circles, subtly feeding information that would prevent the palace from acting with complete impunity. She demanded meetings with senior palace staff, refusing to leave until she had been heard. This was a woman operating on pure instinct. Maternal instinct fused with tactical precision, and the palace noticed. At first, they tried to downplay her involvement. A mother worried, overreacting. But Carol was neither quiet nor deferential. She moved deliberately, always one step ahead, leveraging influence, contacts, and the subtle power of public perception. One afternoon, a senior palace aide reported back to Charles. "Mrs. Middleton is no ordinary parent. She is organizing, she is influencing, she is persistent." Charles, who had anticipated resistance from William or even Kate, had not calculated for this level of external interference. And that miscalculation would prove pivotal. Carol's actions escalated. She demanded that William reconsider the approach, questioning not just the dossier, but the motives behind it. She highlighted inconsistencies, potential biases, and the catastrophic public fallout if Kate were treated as anything less than royal perfection. She was relentless. William, exhausted and emotionally spent, found himself caught between two forces: the monarchy he had been raised to serve, and the mother who would not let his wife be undermined. "I can't do this without you," he admitted to Carol one evening, his voice strained. "You have to help me navigate them." Carol nodded, eyes steely. "I won't let them win, William. Not without a fight." And that fight had begun. Over the next days, tension in the palace rose. Private meetings were held. Documents were reviewed. The dossier, once considered sealed and unchallengeable, was scrutinized under a new lens, Carol's lens. Every note, every observation, every coded phrase was dissected for bias, motivation, and accuracy. It became clear that some palace staff had contributed out of fear, some out of loyalty to Charles, and some out of ambition. And Carol intended to expose them all if necessary. The palace's calm exterior began to fracture. Whispers of dissent spread. Staff began questioning the morality of compiling a dossier against the future queen. Even some members of the inner circle, loyal to Charles, began to reconsider the strategy. And then came the moment Carol realized she needed to escalate further. A confidential letter was drafted, carefully worded, meticulously detailed. It outlined every instance of bias, each procedural violation, and the potential consequences for the monarchy if Kate were removed unjustly. It was a direct challenge, a gauntlet thrown at the palace's feet. Carol insisted that William deliver it. He hesitated. The risk was enormous, but he knew it was necessary. He placed the envelope on Charles's desk during a scheduled meeting. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles looked at it, then at William, then back at the envelope, the weight of what it represented clear in his eyes. This was no longer a private family matter. It had become a confrontation with consequences that could ripple through the monarchy and public opinion. And Charles, who had wielded authority with calculated precision, suddenly faced a mother's resolve that could not be ignored. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. For the first time, the palace realized that Carol Middleton was not a mere observer. She was a force to be reckoned with. And the implications were terrifying. Because if Carol succeeded, the monarchy's narrative would be compromised. The dossier would be questioned. Charles's authority would be challenged. And William, caught between the institution and his family, would have to make his ultimate decision. One palace insider later whispered, "She is terrifying when she wants to be. Calm, composed, but completely unstoppable when it comes to her daughter." And that was the truth. Carol's intervention had changed the game. The monarchy could no longer act unilaterally. They had been forced to reckon with a woman whose influence, intelligence, and unwavering maternal love rivaled even the most seasoned courtiers. But the palace is not easily swayed. And Carol knew that. The fight was just beginning. Because when a mother enters the fray, the rules change. And when the monarchy underestimates her, consequences are inevitable. The next move, the palace's counter, would test every line of loyalty, every ounce of courage, and every bond William and Kate had left intact. And what came next would reveal the true cost of challenging the crown from the inside. No one in the royal household anticipated the force Carol Middleton had unleashed. But the palace quickly realized they could not allow this interference to continue. And so, the silencing order was born. The directive was subtle, carefully worded, and chilling in its implications. It was not an official decree. No public announcement would ever carry it. It was whispered, circulated among a select group of advisors, and enforced with precision. Its purpose was simple: contain Carol Middleton, control the narrative, prevent the family from influencing the course of the monarchy's plans for Kate. But the palace underestimated one thing: maternal determination. The first notice arrived in the form of a letter. A soft cream envelope, unassuming, but carrying the weight of the institution itself. Carol read it with growing disbelief. "It has come to our attention that your actions regarding the ongoing discussions about the Princess of Wales are not in alignment with palace protocols. We strongly advise that all communication and intervention cease immediately to prevent disruption to institutional procedures." The language was calm, measured, professional, but the threat was unmistakable. Cease. Immediately. Disruption. For Carol, these words were not just suggestions, they were a warning. The palace was trying to intimidate her, to make her step back, to silence her influence. And they had miscalculated. Carol's response was swift, deliberate, and unyielding. She did not reply with fear. She did not apologize. She did not back down. Instead, she organized her response with precision. She gathered evidence, documented interactions, and prepared her own dossier. This one to counter the monarchy's narrative, to expose inconsistencies, and to protect her daughter at all costs. Meanwhile, tension within the palace reached a fever pitch. Staff whispered in corridors. Advisors argued in hushed tones behind closed doors. Even senior aides loyal to the crown began to question the wisdom of attempting